This episode is brought to you by JC Engineers. With town planners, engineers, project managers, and building professionals, they provide practical common sense solutions to any project. Visit them at www.jcengineers.com.au.
Welcome back to another episode of So What Does That Mean? Thanks again for your continued support of the podcast. We've had a lot of messages come through, so keep the questions coming. They are definitely giving us some ideas for future episodes for you guys. So today's episode is about what compliant actually means and what it doesn't. Brendan, can you just give us a quick overview of what compliant is?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, compliance means that you comply with a certain standard or piece of legislation that is mandated throughout the industry.
Okay.
So key points would be, just because something's compliant doesn't mean it's going to perform well.
Okay.
And what does performance mean? What are you intending it to do, whatever
Okay.
it is?
Mm-hmm.
Minimum standard is generally associated with compliance,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone in the industry is trying to achieve that tick to be able to move on to the next stage, whatever that might be. Achieving that tick means that they've got to adhere to the minimum standards, the minimum compliance requirements. So it tends to get grouped to minimum standards, but is minimum standard actually the best outcome for what you're trying to achieve with your project?
Okay. So compliant doesn't mean it's safe?
No, I mean, compliant means that it meets the minimum rules, not the best outcome. Something can comply and still fail in practice.
Right.
I mean, a pretty key stat that I've found while sort of looking into this is 85%, roughly 85% of multi-owned residential buildings in Australia have at least one significant defect, even after it's been signed off as compliant.
It's quite significant.
Yeah, exactly. The three big ones that we see all the time: waterproofing, it's around about 42% of serious defects. Fire safety is 24%, and then structural issues 15%.
Okay.
So it gives you some sort of an indication as to, the complexities of compliance versus performance.
Okay. So why does this compliance issue get misunderstood so often?
Well, I think the people who aren't used to hearing it all the time, compliant means it sounds definitive. It sounds reassuring. It complies. Awesome. That's all I have to do. So that's enough. My budget loves me because I don't have to go over the minimum standards. I just need to get that tick and then it's move on.
Right.
It feels as though the responsibility is transferred once that box is ticked.
Okay.
It's important to understand too that the majority of these codes that we deal with day in, day out, they're quite complex. It's not straightforward. Like there are codes that are out there that don't make sense. 100%. We've seen them all the time. It is up to your registered professional engineer to determine which code applies in which case and why.
Okay. If
anything does fail for whatever reason or not perform in the way it's intended to, there's a legal case. Something comes into question, the investigation is going to come back to the engineer and go, well, who made the decision to do this?
Mm-hmm.
If your engineer can come back and say, well, me and a group of my peers would follow the same process, and this is the process over here, it complies with the code. Right?
Okay.
So it can be confusing, but I would always encourage another review gets taken place, and it depends on what that review is for. So you'll have different goals, you'll have different objectives for what you want your project to have. I want a house that doesn't. I want a house that's got concrete in it that doesn't crack for 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that's your objective. That's fine. So to do that, we have to overspec the concrete, we have to overspec the reinforcement, we have to overspec the columns, we have to overspec everything which is over and atop the minimum standard to be able to achieve that outcome of sustainability for 100 years.
So then, so it's compliant, but it's overspec at the same time.
Yeah, and those objectives can change project to project, client to client, stakeholder to stakeholder. If you're generally building an asset as part of your development, that's then going to get handed over to your local governing authority or utility owner. They want something that they don't have to come in and maintain every year or every 6 months. They want to do the minimum amount of work possible because that's then going to then become part of their budget spend for operation and maintenance. And it's something that they didn't account for when the asset was there at the start.
Right. Okay. And what should people ask when they hear it complies?
Complies with what?
Okay.
What does it comply with? In Australia, every state's got a different level of compliance.
Okay.
You've got the building code, which is the NCC or Building Code of Australia, BCA, that goes throughout Australia. It cannot give you a detailed description and a detailed step-by-step process to follow for every single building that you're going to develop in Australia.
Right.
It just doesn't happen.
Okay.
And if you had it, it'd be 8,000 pages long. No one would understand what the hell it meant. And it would take you 3 years to get to the end result that you need.
Yeah.
So they start with a high level overlapping type of legislation. It says, generally speaking, anything around about this or around about that, do this. If it's outside of that, further investigate. That further investigation generally comes into your engineer's hands or your specialist's hands, where they look at it specifically for that use case they might have. They call them performance solutions, right? Then when you look in the development side, you've got your local government. So they've got their guidelines and their standards that they want every development to adhere to within their community. They've consulted with their community representatives on what they best want for their community. So that's the overarching compliance. Then from there, you then break down, okay, well, which element applies to what? So you've got compliance documents for earthworks. You've got compliance documents for concrete. You've got compliance documents for foundations, which includes concrete. You've got compliance documents for steel beams. You've got compliance documents for bolts, nuts, everything throughout. So you can see that there are significant amount of compliance documents that come through, and you deal with every single day. So, what does this comply with? Is probably the number one question. There are 2 or 3 different codes that I know of straight away that conflict with one another and produce different results.
Right.
So you've got to decide which one's going to apply to this case. And it's going to be different every single time. There's a lot of subjectivity that comes into play when you're assessing things like this. That's why you've got registered professional engineers to be able to guide you in that space.
Yes.
Where does it sit on the risk curve? So if you did this, then what?
Okay.
What happens from there? So, and I mean, and if I do nothing about it, then what's going to happen then? So, I mean, stormwater, treating stormwater on your property is a classic one. Most compliance requirements so that you can't adversely affect your neighbours or any other property outside of the boundary of your property. So you've got to treat it on site. So, what if you can't? What if you're on a property where you are on a quite a steep slope. The road is above your house level. The land grades downwards, and then you have to then capture all of the water, and you're at a low point to then be able to discharge back to, we call a legal point of discharge, which is basically a point where, legally you can discharge your stormwater to. And generally speaking, that's within the public network. What if your legal point of discharge is higher than your point of capture?
Right.
The only way you're going to do that is to pump it.
Yeah.
Right. And to put a pump in, but pumps cost money. They break down. No one maintains them.
Yeah.
Who's going into their backyard to maintain a pump every bloody year?
Yeah.
Nobody is. They require electrical. They require all these different things that come into play. Now, most local governments within inner city areas are going through a phase of basically saying no to pumps. So if you put a plan in place to have a pump to be able to discharge it to legal point of discharge, their compliance documents say no pumps. And they generally make that decision based on the fact that, no one maintains them, they cost money, and they always become an issue for people later on. And the issues generally somehow come back to local government and becomes their issue. So they don't want to deal with it. So they're trying to mandate it and hit it front on. If you do come up with, if you do find that problem, there are other ways around it. You now got to start talking to your neighbour to try and ask
tap
them,
into theirs or something.
Can I tap into your existing line? Or, hey, can I lease a bit of land off you so I can run my pipe down to the legal point of discharge at the front of your property because it's downhill? How are you going to achieve that? That's generally not standard.
Right.
It's over and above. And I mean, another good question is like, what's the cost if it technically complies but performs poorly? I mean, waterproofing is a classic example. Waterproofing is an agent that you apply. It's a very thin agent. It's generally chemical, and you apply it in a specific way mandated from the suppliers and manufacturers that have tested it that way. If that application isn't done properly, who's checking it? Who confirms? If you just get, how many times do you go to IKEA and you get a set of instruction from IKEA to follow?
You always have a bolt.
And you look at it and you go, no, I don't need that. And away you go. And you end up with the excess parts and you go, oh shit, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah.
So, you involve people in that process and naturally speaking, it complies because you've applied a waterproof membrane.
But has it been?
But has it been applied properly?
Yeah.
Who's applied it? Who's then certified it? If you then...
How do you check that?
Well,
how do you check if it's been applied properly? If you go in and give a visual inspection and it looks like it's been applied properly, how's someone going to know?
Well, this is the problem, right? A lot of waterproof membranes are clear. So how do you know whether there's a membrane on it? Generally, feel, you can generally see whether a membrane's been applied. The difference between where the membrane finishes and the natural material thereafter. There's generally a differentiator that you can sort of see there. But really, unless you've witnessed it go in, you can't confirm it complies, because just because it's there and you've seen it doesn't mean that it's been applied in the way that it needs to be applied in. And if we're talking about, 300 micron, which is, 0.03 or whatever of a millimeter in terms of thickness.
Yeah.
If you have one little bit of movement in that structure that you're trying to apply the waterproof membrane to, one little bit of movement means it's going to either fracture the membrane and crack whatever's happening or whatever it might be. And as soon as you fracture that membrane, it can be 0.1 of a mil thick, it can be 0.01 mil thick, and then only enough to get some moisture molecules within. And as soon as that happens, you've now got moisture on the inside where it shouldn't be. It's the purpose of a waterproof membrane.
Right.
So, I mean, waterproof membranes also act as a bit of a default for designers. They don't really think about too much where your membranes are going to go. They're just sort of, because from a design point of view, it's just a dotted line.
Yeah.
You put a little note there and go apply a waterproof membrane. You can't design it. You just go put one here.
Right.
But just because you've put something there doesn't mean that that any water that gets into the external area there, hits the membrane, is not going to get diverted somewhere else.
Mm.
So you've also got to think about, okay, well, what other areas do I need to apply this membrane to? So, so what's the cost if it technically complies but performs badly? So that would be an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
But probably one of the big questions, I think, is what happens if conditions change? So just because we're designing something to what's happening at the moment and, the standards and things like that, what happens if they change the standards? What happens if your conditions on site actually change? Your dry areas of your property are now all of a sudden wet.
Mm.
So that's a good question. What happens if conditions change? But also ask the designers, ask the consultants, ask the people who are reviewing this. What would you do differently if this was your project? This is yours. You're going to live in it. Your parents are going to live in it. You're building it for them. You want them to make sure that they have the best result for them.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I suppose that wraps up episode 5. I think the big takeaway from this is compliance tells you the rule was met, not that the outcome is good, safe, or low risk. If you stop at it complies, you stop thinking too early. The better question isn't, is it allowed? It's, what does this mean when it's built, used, and stressed in the real world? Thanks again for joining us for another episode. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, and we look forward to speaking with you next time.